This panel is about fair finance. Finance is key, but unless we makes it fair and make sure it delivers for all, there is no sense of having finance, because it needs to deliver to people, and all of people from vulnerable to marginalized segment of the population as well that we talk about, right? In terms of, I think, when it comes to emerging economies and developing countries, there are threefold challenges that these countries are facing. One is the current energy system that need to be transitioned. We are already talking about how to transition the existing energy system. The second, in these countries, there is already rising energy demand. There is rising income level. People are expecting a better quality of life, maybe more air conditioner, more freezers in homes, right? So demand is increasing. And the third aspect is these countries are already, a lot of climatic events, extreme weather events are facing. So more on the adaptation side, there is a demand as well. And when it comes to adaptation, energy system has to be resilient, right? So how to think about that? So these are the three kind of key challenges when we are going to think about, from the finance side. Let me give you a number. So in 2024, there were $2.2 trillion global energy investment happened. But when we are talking about what do we need by 2030, it's around $5.6 trillion. So from 2.4, we need to take it to $5.6 trillion per annum global energy investment is required by 2030. So this is the gap that we are talking about. But the biggest challenge here, that most of this money goes to developed countries, the global north, and China. And who is suffering? The emerging economies and the developing countries, they are not able to do the transition in a fair way because there is no fair finance. Less than 15% of the total clean energy investment has gone to energy and this emerging economies and developing countries. Less than 15% in 2024. So then you can think about. However, if you look at the population, it's 65% of the population in the world is sitting in emerging economies and developing countries. So if there are 65% population, why there is 15% investment? Okay? So that's what we are going to discuss here. We are going to have this discussion into three sets. We'll talk about international architecture, financial architecture, what needs to change there. Then we are going to talk about more at the national level, and then we are going to talk about how to deliver to people. Okay? And as I said, I've got this fantastic panel, talking about from all these three aspects. Okay? I want to hand over it to, maybe start with Julia, just next to me here. If you can take maybe 1 minute to introduce yourself. I talked about the title and your name, but talk about in your day-to-day life, how do you bridge this gap? In your day-to-day life, how you are working on climate finance to bridge this gap.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation. I really enjoyed the panel so far and getting a more South-South cooperation perspective, especially the previous session on the renewable energy transition. I work at the OECD, and our slogan is Better Policies for Better Lives. And in the place I'm working is CEFIM, which stands for Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization. And here we work at a place where you might not expect OECD to intervene, because we exclusively work with emerging economies and we provide country-tailored, demand-driven support. And that means that we work over a longer period with a given country. We have a lot of activities in Indonesia, Thailand, India, but also on the African continent in Egypt and South Africa, where we do analytical support, first of all, to analyze demand and supply-driven challenges, but then also move into support for implementation, providing capacity building, matchmaking exercises, ecosystem support. OECD more broadly, obviously we are heavily involved in policy dialogue activities at the international level. We discuss issues related to the international architecture finance. And we are very much data-driven and provide evidence to try to get you good practice examples where other countries can learn from each other. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Julia. Nakul, over to you.
Thanks, Piyush, and thank you very much. I think very interesting discussion, and yeah, I think um, um, in terms of I think how, first of all, I'll like to start with the context. I think it's important and it's really interesting that we are having this discussion just in the next week when we have just completed the COP30 negotiations, and that's important to mention. And COP30 also builds on not only just the annual event, but also to the fact that we were having a demand on just energy transition work program this year. We were also having a demand of, the fist fight again between global north and south on issues related to Article 9.1, Article 2.1, the obligation and the mobilization of climate finance, and of course, energy transition. And then besides it, I think we should also not forget the COP29, the last 3 years of new collective quantified goal on finance. So given this context, I think having this discussion in Cape Town and with South Africa being there, it's a great opportunity to touch upon on things which are very relevant for Global South. And in terms of day-to-day, I think I work with a global think tank called E3G. We work on climate policies, we work on climate negotiations. We are a neutral and independent think tank, but I think coming from Global South, I personally make sure that the conversations that we are having throughout the year and we are having today are not vastly different, but I think there is a slight caveat. Throughout the year in negotiations, what we have that as Global South, we have been demanding that we have a need and demand sort of a gap that we need to fill up, which is essential and which is important. But besides that, I think today's discussion is also about, whatever we have, whatever penny that we have in terms of public finance, private finance, are we using that judicially? Are we using and deploying that money effectively? So I think that's the overall discussion that we want to take it forward. So thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. Onela, over to you.
Oh, thanks. I want to thank very much. I want to deeply appreciate the opportunity to be here and ORF and for having us the opportunity to talk more and more about climate finance, which is really strange now because all of the geopolitics, they are talking about war, not about climate finance, but deeply the climate finance. It's about sustainability. And it's really a big challenge to talk about how to be fair when we are talking about money, governance, and developing countries. Can it be fair? Nothing is fair in these relations. So I have been part for 5 years of Green Climate Fund as a board member representing the Central Asian countries and the East European countries. Same in the global environmental facilities. I have been representing my country in NAMA Fund and also in Adaptation Fund. I have been for 5 years part of UNFCCC, and because of this, I have been part of every COP in the last 7 years, annually. And reading the articles that COP it's representing every year, you can see that nothing is fair. The rhetoric is big, but money, not at all. So we don't have even, I think, globally, a climate problem or finance climate problem. But we have deeply a coordination problem. And the problem is the architecture. And I am talking about all the funds, GCF, GEF, in the accordance of UNFCCC, the Climate Investment Fund, the Adaptation Fund, every fund that we have, and they are big opportunities for our small countries or big countries with big problems, climate problems. Because all these funds and this architecture was created for a different era. And for economies already stable, for countries not penalized by currency volatility, and also for countries with political stability, and for a planet without war. But now, what they are doing, and this is the main problem, we are talking about finance money or we are talking about defense money. As in Europe, all ministers now, they are bringing into their politics. So yes, we had a Europe talking about 3 years ago about the big European Greek deal, everything was green, green transport, green economy, green, even green love. But now they are talking about defense. They are talking about economy of the military economy and nothing else. So what's about green and what's about finance and what about climate finance? This is the question.
Great. Armando?
Thank you so much for having me and for everyone for sticking around when I know you're hungry. I have to confess, when I saw the title of this panel, I was really excited. Before I joined Southern Transitions, I spent 15 years working in and with development finance institutions. And I have to confess, what I cared about the most was commitments, and that's where it stopped. That's where my goal was achieved. So when I read Beyond Commitments, it really resonated with me, not just because we already are running the risk of being just a talk shop. I think that's already happening, but we can't stop there. There needs to be action, and I think that's what's missing. I was also a bit disappointed that the title said fair, but not just, because I really think that we have to think of fair and just finance, and maybe just stop calling it climate finance and just call it just finance.
Can you just explain, like, what is the difference between fair and just for the whole the people?
For me, at the very least, so the just is more holistic. It involves a whole of economy, a whole of society. Fair, just, it's a bit one-sided. It can be like, oh, okay, it's fair for some, but not for all. Just, for me, is more inclusive. And what I'm gonna try to do today is convince you all that we need to stop saying bankable, and we need to start talking about a green premium, because we need to shift the narrative. We don't need to de-risk climate or finance, okay? But more on that. More on that later. I said I would just stick to a minute.
Great, thank you. Maybe just to follow up on, I think some of the, international aspects you have already touched, but I talked about two gaps. One is the gap in the, how much the money is going into energy investments, energy sector, and how much, where the money is going, right? Who needs it most and where it is going. So these two gaps, big gap exist. There are a lot of changes required in the international financial architecture. And, the COP process, the UNFCCC, there are a lot of commitments are happening, but are those commitments are delivering, right, at the international level? So maybe I would like to start with you,
Yes.
Nila.
Yes.
With you, maybe because you have been part of the two very important architecture, like Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility. Do you think something need to change there?
Oh, yeah. So the challenge is that globally, we are not moving in the right scale, to the right places, or to the right instruments. And I will explain why. The first, Paris Agreement. It's a global agreement. And let's say it's almost universal, but the two largest emitters, China and US, shape global emissions curves alone. 14% and 21%. And we have US coming in and out of the Paris Agreement. And then we have also China that stays in, but its emissions continue to rise to its energy demand curve. Secondly, we have COP every year. We are bringing a lot of documents, a lot of articles, and I want to bring here 3 years ago at COP, I was seeing all 7 countries prime ministers for Balkans. So they went to COP, starting from my prime minister, and because they were obliged from the UNFCCC, they said that they have obligation, and they also said that they will allow the country to have less to 49% of the emissions. And then they came back to our countries, all of them, and in 3 years they don't have a single line in their annual budgets for climate finance or for this kind of emissions or for preventing this kind of emissions. And the more ridiculous case, it's my country's prime minister, that he said 49% as the UNFCCC was obliged to do, as in the frame of the UNFCCC was obliged to do, but we are 100% renewable energy production in our country. And any citizen in this world with zero knowledge in the environmental finance knows that we can't create 49% of less emissions, because otherwise we will be in the stone area. The third point is the SDGs. Do you know how percent these SDGs they are implemented in our planet? We have a lot of strategies now in 30 years, in 20 years, a lot of strategies, planification, a number of million of PowerPoints, perfect PowerPoints presenting our SDGs and our SDGs objectives. But globally, SDGs, they are 8 to 18% implemented. So what are we creating here? Ambitions alone does not produce bankable projects. And for climate finance, we need bankable projects. And so in this frame, I think that we need to change the architecture, the bureaucracy, and the global thinking on how we can move the world into the climate finance, but effectively, not just rhetorically.
Thank you. The architecture and the bureaucracy that you're talking about. And I wanted to come to another very important organization, OECD. Julia is coming from OECD. And it's called a club of rich countries. But I know OECD is also working very hard in terms of how international financial architecture can deliver for developing countries.
Thank you very much. I'm going
to
to challenge the rich club reputation because we now have 38 member countries, including countries such as Costa Rica and Colombia, and Indonesia is actually an accession candidate member, and Brazil as well. So hopefully the reputation will eventually shift. I think at OECD we are good with data, and we love counting and monitoring what's going on in the world, and we take part in all these global discussions and international financing framework. And I would say the discussion on reforming international finance architecture is underway. But as with any institutional reform, it will take time and it won't happen overnight. And of course, that's why I think it's very important, personally I believe, in small steps. Whatever you can do at your respective level, whether it's national, local, international, regional, I think there are a lot of things that can be done in the meantime because you won't jump from here to an ideal system. So importance of small steps and also different timelines. What can be done in the short term, mid-term, long-term to actually move towards more tangible results, because there's always a lot of talk, but we're not moving towards targets. In terms of concrete actions, of course, I think the reform of multilateral development banks is paramount. We need to move from traditional lending into more innovative financing mechanism. We all talk about blended finance. I would say blended finance is no longer new. It has been around for a while. And the OECD just published in September guidance on how you should use blended finance, and there are 5 core principles. I would like to quickly quote them. The first one, it needs, no matter what, be related to development rationale and development objective. The second one, it should at some point contribute to mobilize commercial bank capital, private finance, and just be used. And therefore, the de-risking is very important. To give you a figure, at the moment, only 4% of the multilateral development banks is being spent on de-risking instruments, and that could be a key lever to unlock private financing. And we do have studies at that. We just launched an incredible working paper where we can find case studies, evidence-based examples from across the world, from Pakistan, India, Colombia, you name it, where you can find success stories of what has been done across the world. Another climate instrument that I find worth mentioning is debt for climate swaps, where that was used in some cases in Egypt, but also other countries. We talked a lot also about the heavy weight of debt servicing of emerging economies. I think that's a great tool where you can combine the good debt relief with something that is also good for the climate. And of course, green bonds have become very popular, and I think the use of sustainability bonds, green bonds, you name it, can be far more extended. Again, this is a long-term process, so importance of setting targets and to contribute at each respective level. I stop here.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Julia. Thanks for that perspective. Armando, I wanted to come to you. I think you heard, this international financial architecture, how this need to change, what are the tools available, but you talked about fairness and justice. How this needs to be incorporated into these two perspectives that you heard?
Sure. So there's a lot I could say about changing the financial architecture, redesigning mandates or investment frameworks or aligning incentives. But I think how that evolves is starting by us. Julia was talking small steps. And I think what we need to do first is change the narrative of how we talk about risk. And risk is the way we rate and measure it to drive financial investment and capital flows. So if we can agree, yesterday we were saying risk is a social construct, and it means different things for different people. So parting from that, how can we take the risk that is being rated by a few global north agencies, and that's determining the cost of capital in the continent, for example, right? So I want to say, let's not talk about lowering risk. Let's not talk about making decarbonization bankable or sharing the risks amongst other people. Yes, there's a space for concessional funds and blended finance, but if the private sector and financial institutions were to adjust even just a little bit their scope of risk, billions would be unlocked, and we wouldn't need blended finance to fund a just transition, right? So that's where kind of my problem with bankable, and Ornella just said it, was we're trying to make the just transition fit into a financial and risk return model that's got us here in the first place, right? Let's not try to make that fit, but let's think, how do we make our banks and our financial institutions and our risk frameworks greener, more SME-able, more global southable? If we're going to turn words into verbs, let's make them good words.
Great.
One sentence.
Okay.
For this, we are not talking just about finance. We are talking about climate finance. Because private sector has to finance and the governments, they has to guarantee. Without this, it cannot be just finance. Yes, and this is the problem of the architecture. I have seen a lot of projects in the countries that I am representing, that they are very good projects, really good projects, but without the support, the institutional support of the governments and the financial support of the governments, without this kind of loans that GCF is giving with 17%, this is not a loan, this is stolen. But without this, the governments has to help the private sector, and without the private sector help from the government, they can't even invest in small countries like mine, or in big countries that they have a lot of energy problems.
I think we're saying the same thing, but I'll give an opportunity to the other.
I just want to take Nakul's perspective. He's working for a think tank in India and excellent work on the climate finance side. If you can share some perspective, how India is looking at this international climate finance architecture, what are the expectations? What India is asking for change basically in that whole architecture. So.
Thanks, Piyush. I think a couple of points, and I totally agree with all the points which have been made by panelists. I think it's important to note, how geopolitics and international headwinds have been, challenging the whole conversation around energy and climate finance, and so to say, the ambition around it, the NDC's ambition back home. It's also important and worthy to note the just transition conversation, which I also mentioned, which was one of the hot topics at COP. It's also important to also note that the ambition on ground, which is taking place back home in South Asia, Pakistan, India, the renewables boom, which is happening. So I think everything is important, but I think to start with, we have to be very clear on the fact that we have to understand these are two separate things. So at one point of time when we said that it is important that for us to talk about equity, justice, that's very important. The money has to flow where there is need. If the infrastructure of tomorrow is going to be built in next 10 to 20 years in Global South, the money from Global North has to flow in. But the larger question is whatever money that we have as of now, in any form, be it public finance, be it private finance, be it equity, be it debt, any form, how and where and how we can use that money into the best form. So I think reacting to that and bringing and teeing up with India's perspective, it's important to understand. I think in 2023 and before 2023, during India's G20 presidency, this conversation was also one of the hot topics that international financial reform architecture should be challenged and it should be attuned to the global southern realities. And that's still the case. But I think we very much know about the global political headwinds. We, of course, know that international financial institutions, it's based on voting rights. Whosoever puts howsoever money, it's based on those voting rights. But before we can change that, before we can really challenge the global geopolitical order, the foreign policy analysts have to answer that. At least what we can do for the time being is work in a symbiotic manner. And what we suggest from E3G perspective is to take 3 action points. One is to understand that we need to certainly increase the mandate of MDBs, international financial institutions. They should be allowed to move beyond the cautious cycle of World War II after World War II when they were made, to more catalytic role in international finance mobilization. Which means that they should be more risk-taking. They should be, allowed to take more risk guarantees for financing energy transition in emerging economies. So that's one. But having said that, it does not work, individually, singularly. It has to be symbiotically, worked with, how that pipeline of projects are being created back home domestically. So that's where reshaping the international financial architecture comes the question of how can you rechannel the money into the pipes which are blocked back home. So how can you make sure that the country platforms are working? How can you make sure that there is single window clearance of all those projects? How can you make sure that all of those projects are linked to the national determined contribution or NAPs or both? So that's important. And finally, also from a global south perspective, it's very important. We are talking, this in terms of emerging economies. It's also important to note there are more than a couple of global south countries who does not have the fiscal space right now to do that either. In South Asia, we can very well speak of Sri Lanka. A couple of years ago, the debt servicing liability that Sri Lanka has was around 9 to 10% of their annual GDP. So can you expect those global southern countries to even talk about all of these issues? So that's where the tools like debt for climate swaps, they come into the debt treatment facility, urgent debt treatment facility. All of these fiscal tools comes into play. So I think we have to take a balanced view in terms of what fits where. Yeah. And there's no one single thumbs up rule which will apply to also. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Nakul. I think you have already started kind of touching at the national level, but I wanted to take the conversation more like internal. As a country, we are talking about international financial architecture. There is no doubt that need to change, but there is a lot of changes required at the national level as well, right? There has to be a policy ecosystem, regulatory ecosystem. There has to be some kind of framework for private sector participation. We are talking about philanthropic support as well. So my next question is, can we look internally at the domestic level, at the country level, what needs to change? How we can create an enabling framework, or maybe if there are already any best practices at the country level for domestic climate finance mobilization. Maybe you can share that as well. I wanted to come to you, Armando, first, from South Africa. What are the examples or what needs to change, for at the domestic level?
Sure, okay. Jesus, and I just have 2 minutes to explain. Okay, perhaps before I touch on that, I want to go back to the point to Ornella and just to say that we are saying the same thing. And in order to move the needle nationally, but I think this applies to the global south as well, we need the private sector, right? That gap is not going to close without the private sector. And I think what I was talking about earlier about risk can take many forms, and it can take the form of a private sector hiding behind what they call the green premium, right? And that gives industry and commercial banks and the private sector in general the excuse to hide behind additional costs and say, no, that's not bankable, that's not investable, without actually taking into account the additional cost of inaction and of business as usual. So this is what I'm trying to convince everyone. If we shift the narrative to say, okay, this hasn't been working, the way we're pricing risk. When we look at South Africa, we have, I think, 3 times the cost of capital than Brazil or than Indonesia. And the reason behind that, there's a couple of reasons, but one of the main drivers is the way banks have decided that we are too risky. So that's what I'm trying to change. How can we actually move away from that costing and look forward? And I think that's what's missing in our frameworks, that myopic vision that risk is just one thing, or what we've been told.
Great. Thank you, Armando. Get ready with your questions. I wanted to come back to you for some questions, but maybe Onela, maybe very short kind of on the domestic side.
Do we need more international institutions? I don't think so. We need less bureaucracy in these institutions. Only for the adaptation, we have 7 funds, global funds. Only 3 of them, they are giving funds. The other 4 of them, they are giving 1 or 2 projects by year. In the Green Climate Fund, you have to apply now, and in 7 years, probably you will start your project. And in 7 years, everything is changed because we are more technology, we have more innovation, and you have to rewrite the project from the beginning. So what we need our own delivery partners, accredited entities, how to implement our own projects. Because yes, international expertise is very good, but how to have, for example, German expertise for Albania reality. It's not working at all. We need to create our own expertise. And the best expertise, as I know, it's in the private sector. They are working. We are just seeing the regulations, we are approving the regulations as governments or as institutions, but the private sector is the implementer. And so in this frame, the best expertise is in the private sector, and it's only one way to be partner with the private sector for the energy transition.
Thank you, Julia.
Yeah, I will try to answer your question. Sure. But simply, for the de-risking instruments, it's never a single instrument like green premium or whatever which will make it. I think we argue it's always a package that you try to put in place to get the best out of it. At the national level, there's much to do, and I believe the just energy transition platforms obviously play a key role in that process. And in Egypt, we have the Nexus for Food, Water and Energy. And I think at least that helps coordinate and channel international resources through a nationally owned platform. And the mutual learning that has been taking place, and now I know they want to set at Country Hub, etc., is, I think, greatly useful in sharing experience between different countries who have the ChatP. Yet I do think there are still many challenges, because when you listen to the international financing, well, they say, oh, there are no bankable projects. You already said there's no project pipeline, or it's not bankable, whatever that means. And on the other side, we hear that, oh, we have so many projects and we cannot find funding. Yeah. So there is clearly a problem if you listen to both sides, and there must be something to close that missing link, to work together to improve the matchmaking. I think that's a key solution.
Very, very important.
And the second point I'd like to make is the whole ecosystem. It's obviously not just, it's a whole environment, the policy environment, the regulatory framework, policy certainty. Taking again an example from Egypt, hydrogen, green hydrogen development, there is a huge investment pipeline, many billions foreseen for future projects, but yet there is no single project that actually reached investment decision. And that is still due to the perceived high risk. So in the Egyptian case, the government has done a lot to make it attractive to invest. They've done a lot to improve the regulatory investment framework, but still people feel we need more certainty. So.
Great. Nakul, I think you already shared some Indian perspective. Maybe if we can take some question, if there is already in the audience.
Thank you. My name is Sivu Mhlana. I'm from the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at the University of the Witwatersrand. I was very excited, actually, to have this panel, so thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you for the passion that you've demonstrated on the stage so far. Because I think this is it's a serious question, and it's already, the issue of debt has already been raised, but I appreciate the kind of provocation again from Armando around the issue of justice. And I had this kind of reflection with the first conversation that we were having about just energy transitions, and unfortunately we didn't have time. But what I had wanted to say then as well is that the very inclusion of the word justice implies that there is an injustice. And unfortunately, we haven't had much time to actually engage that injustice. But I think it's key to how we actually respond to issues of kind of transition, but also in terms of how we think about financing. And the question that I actually have for the panel then is, given what we understand in terms of the current model of how it's been based on exploitation and oppression, and particularly of women workers and communities, but also the focus on market-based solutions when we also are aware of the limitations and the data on that as well, particularly in relation to the issue of debt, how kind of the current debt sustainability frameworks often discourage, firstly, investing in kind of climate responses, but they also promote certain sectors that are likely to have an underrepresentation of women, but that are also likely to promote the continuous and endless extraction that has contributed to the crisis that we're in. What are the kind of specific policies do you have? I think beyond a narrative shift, I think we're always obsessed with the narrative. I think we know what the narrative is. What is it that we need to actually hold countries, specifically in the global north, that have contributed to the crisis that we're in, to particularly target the issue of labor and supporting women, workers, and communities in this transition, which I think are often left out of this conversation? Thank you.
Great question. I think there is a lot. There are so many different aspects, but I think if you, it's all coming down to justice and fairness. So maybe you wanna very quickly. I think we don't have time. So, but yeah, do you wanna take Armando? Yeah.
Sure. I'll be super brief so I can try to bring in the other panelists. But I think it boils down to how we see value as well. Earlier today, I think someone was saying, the only thing that moves the needle is those investments that make money. And that's a very narrow way of seeing value. Where's the value of health? Where's the value of gender equality that she was just asking about? And so there are scientific proven methods. If you want to monetize health and social justice, there are ways to monetize that, to say, for every carbon plant that you remove, this society becomes that much more healthier, and thus you save X amount of billions.
30 seconds.
Fair climate change is not a charity, for sure. It's just a global risk management. And investments, this kind of finance investment, energy investments, they are not just creating money, they are creating employment. And in this frame, creating employment means more employment for our society, more employment for the women, more employment for also for all the villages, because they have to care about this kind of investments. So I think this is in this local, domestic frame of this kind of climate finance.
Okay, Nakul.
Just transition, gender equity, very quickly, I think I can share an example. One of the states in India, the Jharkhand Energy Transition Workforce, and a couple of other partners back home are working to make sure that there is microfinance which is available for self-help groups in India which are situated in the geographical areas where there are fossil fuel mining areas and coal, especially mining areas. So I think prioritizing the mobilization of finance to the ground level, to the families, to the women is something which is operationally being done in some of the business cases by the way of microfinance back home, and we can share more details about that with you.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Julia, you have the final words.
Well, I will also take an example, because when we talk about just transition, we all want to hear tangible results on the ground. And I think that's one of the key issues, that there's been a lot of talking about just transition, but not that much action on the ground. And one way of doing this is, of course, community-based financing. We had a session on agriculture and livelihoods this morning and talked about the importance of ensuring stable energy access. So there is a lot of opportunity to invest into climate-smart agriculture projects. We have best practice example from across the world, from India, also from Brazil and South Africa. Nevertheless, I would like to emphasize the importance of economic incentives. I think that's really key, because nobody will wake up and say, oh, let me invest in climate-smart agriculture. But if the government or international actors, or if there's an ecosystem putting in place incentives to invest into that solutions, I think you can achieve a hell lot more.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks to all our panelists and the participants for staying. And can we give a round of applause to everyone? Thank you.